privileged to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Wolfgang Maening, Chair of Economic Policy at the University of Hamburg. Professor Maening is internationally renowned as one of the world's leading authorities on Olympic economics, sports governance, and mega event management. His groundbreaking research has influenced policy decisions across multiple Olympic host cities and has been instrumental in shaping modern thinking on Olympic legacy, cost-benefit analysis, and governance reforms. Professor Maening himself is an Olympic champion, a gold medalist in rowing from the 1988 Seoul Olympics, which gives him a unique dual perspective as both an elite athlete and a premier academic researcher. So I would now request Professor Wolfgang Maening.
Hello. Oh yes, good. Very good. It's 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Not that easy. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now? Good. Very good. So, hello. Thank you for making it possible for me to be here. I'm very honored to be here. Happy to share some insights, and I would like to discuss some issues of corruption in sports. First of all, no, that's the wrong presentation, sorry. There's another presentation. That's the wrong presentation. It's a completely different issue. Yeah, take this one. Thank you. Yeah. So, first of all, I would like to mention that corruption in sports is nothing new. The first documented case of corruption in sports is 2,400 years old. And it's documented because of those tsanes. See those tsanes here? Pillars of shame would be the English translation. This is the Olympic Stadium in Olympia in Greece. It's worth visiting it, where the traditional ancient Greek Olympic Games had been taking place. This is the area where the athletes prepared, and then they went through that gate to the competition site. And in cases where athletes or their managers, mostly their fathers at that time, pursued delinquent strategies, and it was discovered, they were condemned to a punishment, a heavy punishment. They had to pay the most expensive artists of that time, and they had to use the best materials of that time, marble, in order to construct these pillars of shames. And on the pillars of shames, there's an inscription about the delinquent strategy that the athlete has pursued. So, for example, the first case, 2,400 years ago, is from the Olympic Games of 388 before Christ, and it was the athlete Eupolos of Thessalia who successfully bribed three of his competitors in the fist combat, so that's a predecessor of boxing, and among them the reigning champion Phormyon of Halikarnassos, and he won the competition of the Olympic fist fight. And there are also records of an early case of corruption in sport management, in the year 12 before Christ, Damonikos of Elis, he was the father of the Olympic wrestler Polektor, attempted to bribe Sosandos, he was the father of another Olympic wrestler, in order to make possible that his son would win the Olympic victory. So with these pillars of shame, the eternal fame to be an Olympic champion turned into an eternal shame of having been conducted illegal structures, which might be important in some later stages of the discussion. So in modern times, did we have, is corruption a problem? Sometimes people even now think it's not a problem, and I want to bring to your attention some of the most prominent, only some of the very most prominent case of corruption in the Olympics since 1988. So this case is hurting me personally, because here in 1988, the Olympic Games where I participated as well, the boxer, the United States boxer Roy Jones Jr. was denied the gold medal in the middleweight fight against the South Korean athlete, although he heavily dominated the fight. It was just by good luck that the GDR fumbled, and some researchers looked into the documents of the secret policy of GDR, and they detected documents that the referees of that fight had been bribed with $5,000, and for the $5,000 they decided against their best knowledge, and they gave the gold medal to the wrong athlete. The IOC, by the way, never revised the decision, but in 2023, so many years after the Olympic Games, the South Korean athlete handed over the gold medal to the US American athlete. For the Nagano Winter Games, it is well documented by the official documents of the bid committee himself that they spent $4 million, so today that would be something like $10 million, to entertain IOC members. So it was at that time more than $47,000 per IOC members, including gifts worth of $5,700. At that time, there was a limit to give presents to IOC members that was 200 euros. Please note, and this is why it's done in italics, the IOC never went into the case. It was not condemned. The bid committee wasn't condemned. No one acting in this case was ever condemned to any sentences. Then there was the Salt Lake City scandal. Salt Lake City got the Olympic Games in 2002. The scandal was discovered in 1998. And what happened? Bid officials from Atlanta gave some $1.2 million in cash, gifts, medical treatment, and even university tuition fees to some 10 IOC members. And it is said that it heavily influenced the decision of the IOC to hand the Olympic Winter Games to Salt Lake City in 2002. And then in the same Olympic Games, another really strange case, there was a French judge who illegally succumbed to pressure from her own federation, so from the French Federation, towards a gold medal to the Russian pair of ice figure skating instead of the Canadians. It was very obvious that the Canadian team was superior, so there was a lot of pressure by the public and also by the IOC. They examined the case, and after some very few days, they decided to award a second gold medal to the Canadian team. So the Russian team was not punished. They got that the gold medal remained with them, but the Canadian team also got the gold medal. And then, more recently, there was the Games of 2016 in Rio, and I will not read everything because you will be much faster in reading it, but it is a real Olympic Games with lots of corruption. The chairman of the Olympic Bid Committee, Nusman, was sentenced to prison for more than 30 years afterwards. And there was not only corruption in getting the Olympic Games in order to make sure that the games would be allocated to Brazil, but after it had been allocated to Brazil, there was a lot of corruption by the construction firm Odebrecht and its subsidiary Braskem, who had even acknowledged that they paid huge bribes to state officials and also to officials from the organizing committee in order to get the construction contracts. In the end, 1/3 of the Brazilian ministers and even the presidents and the vice president of neighboring countries were implicated by the corruption attacks. And in the end, the chief executive officer of Odebrecht was sentenced to 19 years of imprisonment, and more than 70 executive people had been condemned to some sentences. And most recently, Tokyo 2021. Also here in this case, there are strong indications that the IOC decision in favor for Tokyo had been critical. There are rumors or there are indications that Istanbul might have won the case, but Tokyo spent some $8 million at that time by paying. They didn't bribe the IOC members directly, but they gave it to so-called consultancy firms which were closely linked to IOC members. Note that here in this case, and it's a pity that I don't have the pointer, it's not that clear here. In the end, it's even ended with a fatal result. One of the managers of the Japanese Olympic Committee even committed suicide. The marketing firm Dentsu and some other firms in some 6 companies also made a lot of corruption in order to get the marketing and the TV rights to the correct firms and not to the most efficient firms. So, and the last sentence about this is about the consequences of such corruptive behavior. You see that the Japanese Olympic Committee thought about campaigning for Sapporo for the Winter Olympic Games of 2030. But in the Japanese public, after all these corruption scandals, there was no more support for such an application. And the Japanese Olympic Committee had to withdraw its ideas. So in the end, if you look back to what happened, there had been fantastic Olympic Games in Japan and fantastic Olympic Games in Brazil, but from a historic perspective, these fantastic organizations will always be hampered, will always be darkened by the fact that there had been corruption, too much corruption, heavy corruption, which is a pity and which somehow, of course, dampens the expectations or the benefits from the Olympics in your country. India is going to apply for the Olympics, and I think you have a very good chance to win the Olympics. Be aware that you must fight corruption in your country, because it will not help you, even if you have a fantastic organization of the games. If in the history it will be said that there was much corruption, the image of India will not become better by the Olympics, but might even become worse. So corruption is, the first conclusion here is corruption is strong in the Olympic Games. It's too strong, there's too much corruption, and we should be aware of it. Here is a list of the IOC members which had been under scrutiny, which had guilty verdicts. Don't go through the list. It's only impressive that even in the last years, up to recently, there are so many IOC members under attack from state attorneys, etc., etc. So, up to now, I enumerated cases in the Olympic Games where we had corruptive attacks in order to allocate the Olympic Games, the sport event, to the right place. we had manipulations of the competitions. Think about the ice skating, think about the boxing, and we had manipulating of marketing contracts by Denso et al. That's not all of it. If you go to that's an elderly table of publication of mine in 2008. If you go to the history of corruption in sport, you will find that there's also corruption on the membership of national teams. Yes, some people paid money in order to become a member of a national team. Unbelievable, in my opinion. Yeah? There is corruption about the location of federations. There is corruption, of course, in the construction of sports facilities, not only in Brazil, also, for example, in Germany, but in many other countries as well. There is corruption on the TV transmission, there is corruption on promotional rights, like in Japan, and there is a lot of manipulation of competitions, like in the boxing, like in the ice skating, also outside of soccer, which might be the most the largest victim of corruption in international sports. So, in the end, we have to summarize to that step that in the production, in the chain of production, of value production in sport, each and every step has come under attack of corruption. There's no single, there's no exemption of it. Everything in sport had been attacked by corruption. So is it a big problem in sport? Is it an endemic problem of sport? Let me say that my personal assessment is that more than 99% and even more than 99% of the athletes hate corruption and are not corrupt because they are the victims of corruption. 99% of all officials hate corruption and behave correctly. Maybe even 99.9%. So the vast majority of officials and athletes behave correctly in international sports. It's a very small minority which gives a bad picture for sports. So first of all, we do not have a real empirical proof that there is more corruption in sport compared to historic to history. Maybe there is less. We don't have a proof for that. We don't have any proof that it became worse or better, and there's also no proof that corruption in sports is worse or better than in other areas. Here you have a table which is depicting the answers of people like you and me, so the general public, whether they think that in their country the problem of corruption is fairly or very widespread, that's green, fairly or very rare, that's let's call it red, or don't know, it's black. And in my home country, Germany, here, this one, Germany, 51% of the people, so the majority, thinks that corruption is fairly or very widespread. And Germany, according to this table, is one of the best countries in the ranking of corruption. Yeah? Even in Denmark, which plays a role in the next slide, which is one of the best countries in the world in the fight against corruption, a third of the population thinks that corruption is widespread. So Denmark is number one in the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. So those who don't know Denmark, it's a very small country here in the north of Germany. Yeah, it's light yellow, it's the best country. And you do see that corruption is widespread all over the world, with no exception. There's only very few countries like Denmark which are in light yellow. So, now I want to give you a structure of the rest of discussion. I will first go into the problem of defining corruption, and you might be a bit astonished because, yes, maybe there is no definition of corruption. When I started my research on corruption in a publication of 2002, I tried to give a definition, and the definition, you can read it much faster than I can read it, is that it's the use of a position, by an occupant of a position, in a manner which is consciously different to the objectives of his institution, because he wants to get an advantage out of it from the person or the institution, or the institution who is benefiting from his misuse of his office. I put a lot of effort in the definition, and I thought it would be a good definition, but it came under attack. So people like Masters, for example, said, well, that's the definition from the point of view of an academic, of an economist or a political scientist who is thinking in institutions and in individuals. Indeed, that definition is not the real definition, and he defined corruption as the deviation from public expectation that sport will be played and administered in an honest manner. That's his definition. I think it's a bit a broad definition, but I have to admit that he might have a case, because indeed, corruption is defined differently in each country, in each continent. It's defined different way in each sport, and it changes over time. Some very few examples. Franz Beckenbauer, one of the most prominent German athletes, he was world champion in the soccer. He was a coach of a world champion in soccer. He was the president of the of the bid committee who got the world championships in soccer to Germany in 2006. He was under prosecution for corruption for long years after 2006. And under the many allegations was the complaint that he was also president of the FC Bayern München, a famous soccer club, and the FC Bayern München invited national teams from Thailand, Tunisia, Trinidad and Malta for friendly games. And of course these federations got the revenues from the friendly games. Is that corruption? Well, Beckenbauer said no, invitations for friendly games is just a gesture of friendship, nothing else. But note that these four nations had a privilege. They had representatives in the board of directors of the International Football Association. So there was no invitation to India. There was no invitation to other teams which didn't have a vote in the board of directors of the FIFA. Is it corruption or isn't it corruption? It's a kind of definition. Or see the time inconsistency. So for example, in all over the world, you have VIP and business seats in the stadiums, where business firms buy the launches and invite VIPs and to make contacts with them. In Germany, this practice came under attack. A state attorney in my hometown, Berlin, accused 150 VIPs of being corrupt, of accepting invitations, not paying for the VIP status, and there was a long story about it, which in the end led to the fact that today, if you get invited to a VIP lounge in Germany, is something which the people are a bit shy about it. I know it's different to most of the places in the world. So for example, my British colleagues told me, well, but if you want to make a business, you cannot invite him to your office. You must start by playing golf with him. You must start by inviting him to a soccer team or a soccer game or something like that. It's friendship. It's building up trust. You cannot just starting to negotiate. So is it corruption or isn't it corruption? It's a question of definition. And then there are sport-specific differences. So for example, in cycling, Tour de France, everyone knows that there are teams and every member of the team is raising a leg for the captain of the team. It's the captain of the team who wants to win the Tour de France. So they let him ride in the wind shadow. They even push him sometimes. They do everything that the captain will win. It's not the individual who tries to win. They try to make the captain win. In other sports, it would not be accepted. In Formula One, there are the so-called team orders. The most prominent case is Mercedes-Benz, and it was Ferrari, I think, at that time, with Michael Schumacher, 7-time world champion. Of course, his team wanted Michael Schumacher to get the points from each race in Formula One. In the case of the Austrian race in 2002, Rubens Barrichello, a very famous, very good driver, heavily led the race. And he hated that there was a team order that Michael Schumacher should win the race. So what did he do? He raced and he led the race until the finishing line, and just some meters before the finishing line, he stopped down the car and let Schumacher win the race. The audience, of course, was outraged because it was obvious that the athlete, Rubens Barrichello, did not give everything to win the race. The Formula One organization changed the rules afterwards. And then there's about professional boxing. Yeah? Do you know that there are about 28 international federations which are declaring world champions in boxing? Honestly, if you want to become an world champion in boxing, if you want to be able to fight for a world champion title, you will be able. It's well known that you just have to pay one of these less known international boxing federations in order to get a place in the ranking high enough in order to be able to ask for a title fight against the reigning world champion. No problem. So is it corruption? Everyone knows it's a business. You can buy your titles in many world boxing federations. Again, in other federations and other sports, we don't have it. We can't even imagine of something like that. But in boxing, it's well known. Okay, so in the end, and that's, I think, might be interesting for your fight against corruption. Today, we are agnostic. We do not have a definition of corruption. In a very influential report by the United Nations Organization on Drugs and Crime, and the so-called Global Report on Corruption in Sports, in the end, it's only in page number 146, they say, we do not have a definition. We just have an enumeration of corruptive activities, and again, you will be much faster to read it. That's the situation of today, which of course doesn't make it easy to fight corruption if the word of corruption isn't clearly defined. This does not mean that we shouldn't fight against corruption. Just by contrary, but we should be aware that whenever we fight something, people who want to go for the illicit behavior may find a way around and may find activities which are not under our scrutiny. Okay, so first part, we have a problem in defining. We have too many corruption in international sports, and we have a problem in defining sports, corruption in sports. Second, how did the international federations react? Did they react? Did they react sufficiently? Well, they reacted in a hefty manner. The IOC, after the Salt Lake City scandal, changed all the rules. 10 members had been removed from the IOC. They had a new independent IOC ethics commission. They had a 50-point reform, a hefty reform. For example, beforehand, once you had been IOC member, you were an IOC member for lifetime. Not anymore. You got elected, you can be re-elected, but then you have to go. Even the president can be re-elected only once. And also the host city election process, in which we are involved now, has been changed due to the experience of Salt Lake City. There are many initiatives. IPEX is an important one. International Sports Federation now cooperate with Interpol. But in the end, and that's might be a bit disillusioning even, and the report which I mentioned, the report that I mentioned describes 68 initiatives to combat corruption in the sports sectors. So yes, sports have reacted. They have reacted hefty in a really severe way. But they have reacted in so many ways that sometimes it's a bit difficult to overview what the correct behavior is right now. To give you an example, if you Google for protecting the World Cup 2026 and the Summer Olympic Games in Los Angeles of 22, you find so-called 5 key takeaways by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And again, I will not read it because you're much faster in reading it. Everything they write is correct. This is number 1 and number 2. And now this is number 3 and number 4. And I shortened it a bit, only a little bit. Yeah? But in the end, after you have read it, some of you might put the question, so what shall I do? It's complicated. Everything is correct, but it's written in a language which is difficult to understand. And sometimes makes it difficult for organizers like India to follow the advices of the organizations. Yeah? It's not that they always reacted in such a manner that the wording becomes difficult and that it becomes difficult to obey to the rule. There are other examples. And I want to present you the reaction of the International Boxing Federation after the scandal of 1988, where the gold medal went to the wrong athlete. What did they do? They introduced an obligatory electronic assessment system. So around the ring, now there are 5 referees. They all have a keypad. And a point for a boxer is only counted if at least 3 of the 5 referees give the point within a second after the stroke was executed. Also, there's a video control system so that after the fight, if there are reclamations, they can see which referee gave which point according to which hit of the athlete, so they can see whether one or more of the referees did the wrong decision. And in the end, in the second after the end of the fight, the result is clear. Do you remember boxing fights in the early times where the judges came together and they discussed for minutes and minutes about the winner of the boxing fight? Not anymore in the Olympic boxing. In the very same second of the end of the fight, the result is there. It's not only the result of the boxing fight, it's also the result of the examination of the referees. So that's the screenshot of the evaluation of the, what is it? It's not me. So here you see that the Croatian athlete has won, but you see one thing more. You do see that the referee from Slovakia got a caution because in too many cases he gave a different decision to the other 4 referees. And if a referee gets a caution and gets a second caution, he will be taken out of the competition. And there's even more than a caution, there's a warning. And if you get a warning because of too large difference to the other judges, you will be exempted from the competition immediately. So you have both. You have transparency and you have accountability. Transparency because it's well known which hit by the athlete had been counted and which hit has not been counted by each of the 5 referees. That's complete transparency. And you had accountability. Those judges which didn't judge correctly gets a punishment by getting a warning or by getting a caution and by being exempted from the competition. Okay, so the conclusion of the second chapter is the international sports have reacted. There are a lot of reactions. It's going on. But sometimes we have a problem to follow what the discussion of corruption, of the fight against corruption is right now. Let me come to something which a professor of economics, of course, puts in the priority, is the explanation of corruption. I know that Indians like mathematics, so I like to give that slide. It's easy. It looks difficult, but it's very easy. What does it say? We will have a corruptive attack, or we will have corruption only in the case if the delinquent actor has an expectation that the net benefit from being corrupt is larger than the non-pecuniary cost from the illicit behavior. So you must have a net benefit by being corrupt compared to not being corrupt, and that net benefit must be larger than the losses due to the moral values which you are hurting. Which is why even economists admit that moral values and PC are very important. If you raise moral values, you will have less corruption. Your Nobel Prize winner, Mother Teresa, was not corrupt because she had extremely high moral values. Yeah? So let me get a little bit in the calculation, not too much, but we can make it as a case of discussing all the measurements against corruption. So this, the first line of the equation, or the second line of the equation, that's the expectation value of the benefits in case of a successful corruption. So there is a certain risk of being caught, but there's a certain chance of not being caught. And also, if you multiply the probability of not being caught with the benefits of being caught and subtract the cost of being corrupt, that's the expected benefit. So for example, you might have pecuniary income, but you might have costs of preparing the corruption. You might have non-pecuniary income, like for example the victory, the honor of being a victor, for example. But in the case of being caught, you have a lot of losses. You have the financial penalty, you have to pay for the direct cost of being corrupt, etc., etc. I don't go through all of it. You might read it in with more time in the publication I mentioned here. But I think the advantage of the formula is that you can go through each and every argument and determine it with corruption, and it gives you a very good structure, and you can have a checklist whether you thought in your strategy about the determinant. I think it's a complete list of the determinants of corruption. And I will now go with you through some of the determinants, but not all of them because I don't have enough time. I want to mention a word by Nobel Prize winner Becker. He wrote a seminal paper on the economics of crime, and he in the end says, why do some people become criminals and others do not become criminals? And in our case, why do certain people, less than 1% of the athletes, less than 1% of the officials become corrupt? And why do 99% not become corrupt? And he argues it's not because the basic motivation is different. Each and everyone, even in that room, even me, every one of us, has the same thinking, the same way of thinking. If you drive your car, if you think about speeding, you weigh the benefits of speeding against the potential costs of speeding. So the way of thinking is always the same for every one of us. That some people do not become delinquent is just their perceived benefits and costs differ. So some people are very shy about hurting their moral values, and they don't speed. Some people are very shy about financial punishments, so they don't speed. Others do care less, so they are going to speed. Yeah. Okay. So what I do now for some minutes is I want to present you some selected economic insights from on an efficiently oriented fight against corruption. And again, it's biased. It's biased by economics, and it's not complete list. But before I go into the details, I want to mention some principal insights from the theory of corruption of economists. First of all, what is the optimal extent of corruption? In general, economists tend to say the optimal degree of crime is not equal to zero. And you might be astonished. But we have a principle in economics. We say it's only efficient to go for less crime until the costs, the additional cost, we call it marginal cost, of the additional measure is less than the additional benefits from fighting the crime. So there's something like the optimal or to be tolerated crime in general, and that's the same for corruption. So we have to ask ourselves, is the optimal degree of corruption in sport equal to zero? And as an economy and an economist, I would say, oh, I don't know. But an athlete, I say, yes, it is zero. Think about the athlete who has stolen his gold medal. Think about host cities who have stolen the right to host the Olympic Games. Think about your position. Think about finding out in some 10, 20 years that you would have got the Olympic Games with your good concept, but another nation bribed some IOC members and you didn't win the decision. You would hate it, isn't it? So yes, the optimal degree of corruption in sport is equal to zero. Second thing is you have different measurements against or tools against corruption, and the insights from the theory of the firm is you should struggle for a minimal cost combination. In short, each tool has a certain efficiency, but you have to compare the costs of the tool, and you have to divide the efficiency by the costs, and this quota should be the same for all tools. Otherwise, it makes sense to shift your resources from the less efficient strategy to the more efficient strategy. I would be happy to discuss it after the presentation. And then lastly, there is a possibility to structure the anti-corruption instruments according to a publication of Klitgaard in '87. He had the formula: corruption is equal to monopoly plus discretionary powers minus accountability. It's not a real formula, but it's a very good way of thinking how we can fight corruption in sports. And I do not go through all of it. I just want to mention some really maybe extreme economic insights from the fight against corruption. So one of the most demanding and most maybe discussable tools against fighting corruption with the Olympic Games is auctioning off the games. Obviously, if in the history in Brazil and Japan and in America, the managers could finance bribes, it is obvious that by getting the Olympic Games, you may acquire economic funds. So you don't have to pay all the money to the Olympic family that you may earn with the Olympic Games. And indeed, many of the cities who are applying for the Olympic Games, they are not so much interested in having the best athletes of the world in their hometown. They are interested in the economic benefits. So the first idea is diminish the economic benefits. And the easiest way is auction off the Olympic Games. It's a radical economic idea. If you auction off the Olympic Games, our idea would be that in the end, the winner will not make any net benefits anymore. Again, it's very radical, and I know it's not practical. And again, I know it will not be implemented. But as a way of thinking, it might be interesting because the principal idea is take the profit out of the Olympic Games, then the people who are in charge of the Olympic Games, organizing the Olympic Games, don't have the money anymore of being corrupt. Yeah? In this case, the Y in the formula is decreased. Okay, Then reducing the discretionary powers, stronger rule binding, more transparency, the probability of detection increasing. That's the case of the Boxing Federation. So transparency is important in your case. So you should think about your bid committee, how you can make all your decisions as transparent as possible against your people, the Indian people, but also against the international sports federations and against the IOC. They should be able to trust in what you do, and they will be able to trust if you are most transparent that you can be. And have also think about increasing the probability of detection if you want to make sure that you don't have corrupt managers in your organization. Number 3 is increasing the accountability. And again, I think the case of the Boxing Federation is an interesting one. They automatically monitored the performance of the umpires. And if the one umpire is deviant to all the other umpires, it must not be that he is corrupt. It could be that all the others are corrupt, but there's an indication, and it's a very nice tool to go into the details and question what he is doing. And in the case you have someone found to be corrupt, you should think about financial penalties. That's the way of the economist. They think in pecuniary terms. So increase financial penalties. Tell your managers, if you are corrupt, you pay $1 million. That's not the solution, not enough, because there's a famous case of the tennis player Koda. He was detected to be corrupt, and he was condemned by the International Tennis Federation. He had to pay $100,000. He never paid it. So the Tennis Federation said, if you don't pay it, you are not allowed to participate anymore to tennis tournaments. He just said, okay, I don't participate anymore. So the problem is of getting the money. And this is my proposal, deferred payments. Indeed, this is what happens with state functionaries in many states, like also in India. If you have a judge gets a decent salary, a high salary. So to make sure that he's not getting corrupt because it's not attractive, because he would risk to lose a job. So there's still the danger that an older judge, maybe 1 year before the pension, would become corrupt. So what is the solution? The pension. The pension, he is getting a high pension. He is risking to lose the pension. So even in the last year of his terms of office, he will not become corrupt. So indeed, the pension can be called a deferred payment. So if you have managers, pay them very well, because you want to get the best. Yeah? But don't pay all the money immediately. Pay half of it into a fund, call it a pension fund, and tell him he will get the money only 10 years after the Olympic Games, when it has been proven that he behaved correctly. And he will be shy to be corruptive, because he's always looking for the pension in 10 years old, in 10 more years. Okay, good governance, I think we heard a bit about it. And I would like to concentrate on the short-term nomination of referees, of job rotation, and limitation of terms office. Why? Here's the statistics from Germany, from the criminal office of from the Federal Office of Criminal Activities, and it shows that those people who become corrupt, who accept bribes, do in general have a certain duration of their jobs. So you see that most of the people who became corrupt had been in office for 6 to 10 years. It builds up, and then it comes down again. So there is an indication that maybe there is an optimal number of years in which you should be in a certain position. And obviously, 10 years could be too long, and you should think about something like job rotation also in your organization. Okay, some other potential measurements, and which can be deducted from the formula, but maybe also a bit outside. Up to now, we have to say that, yes, there had been a lot of fight against corruption. Yes, the international sports federations had successes to fight it, but still now, there's too much corruption in sports. Second, there have been various initiatives. My colleague from Poland enumerated them. But obviously it's a bit difficult to implement them in all the federations. Money, again, is a good pressure. So for example, in Germany, if my rowing federation, I'm a member of the board of directors of the German Rowing Federation, if we do not comply to the governance codex, we don't get any official money anymore. If we do not comply to the doping codex, we don't get any money. If we do not complain to, and there are money codexes in Germany, we do not get any money. So there's a strong pressure for us to behave in the way that the German Federation wants it. Okay. So, as an economist, of course, I'm an economist who believes in the market. Sometimes I say I'm the last professor in economics in Germany who still believes in the market economy. Yeah, all the rest of my colleagues are socialists, game theorists, or behavioral economists, and that's all the same. I believe in the market system. I believe in private initiative. So, of course, there's a question of, wait a minute, what about private initiatives against corruption? Up to now, the fight against corruption in sports was a fight of federations, of states. So not really private institutions. And that's my current research project. Can we learn from private initiatives? And yes, first of all, there is one very famous private initiative. It's was founded in my hometown, Berlin. Transparency International might be the best known private initiative against corruption. They are highly regarded, and the statistics and the publications are well followed. Yeah? They have important publications, like, for example, the Global Perception Index, which I gave you a bit earlier. Then, of course, the private media has a very good role in fighting corruption. Yeah? And I also want to mention the thousands of initiatives of private clubs against corruption. Again, 99%, more than 99% of the athletes, more than 99% of the officials, and more than 99% of the clubs in the world are anti-corruptive. Don't dare to come to a rowing club and don't dare to try to corrupt your empires in rowing. No chance. That's my opinion. Yeah? Because it's well organized. The people they hate corruption in rowing, they hate corruption, and there's few chances to rugby. So the competition is, of course, also doesn't really apply for corruptive activities. So having said all this, I nevertheless want to look to other private initiatives which are not in the realm of sports. And there are some, and maybe there are some in India, and I would be keen to learn from you. The first is called Adio Pizzo. It's a volunteer association in Italy. Southern Italy, especially Sicily, has a huge problem with the mafia, even today. Yes, even today. It's difficult to run your shop if you are not paying bribes to the mafia. So what did they do? That private association, among many things, invented a certain seal, the so-called pizzo-free seal. And you can put it on your shop. In the window of your shop, many people now have a pizzo-free, which means mafia even don't dare to enter my shop and to ask for a bribe. And if many shop owners do so, mafia will have a hard time. And they founded a club, and they pay some money to the club in order to get assistance in case they are attacked, that they get the right lawyers. Lawyers can be expensive. So the club is indeed an association, a private association, which brings together people who hate corruption and who are stuck together in fighting it. A similar association is Mafia Nein Danke, Mafia No Thank You, association established in Germany. Why in Germany? Because we found out that many mafia activities spill over to Germany, and that much of the mafia income is spent in Germany, for example, in the real estate sector. So private people in Germany founded that association, Mafia Nein Danke. And also here, they somehow, for example, they try to attempt to harmonize laws in the European Union. Then there is this, it's a GOL cooperative group. Again, they try to identify a certain label. Travel, tourism is one of the sectors which is most heavily attacked by mafia. If you own a hotel in Sicily, in southern Italy, you will have contacts to the mafia. So they came together and said, we don't want it anymore. We want to have a sustainable tourism, and we have a seal now. It's called GOL Travel. The hotels may have a label, GOL Travel, if they promise not to be corrupt, if they promise to give an announcement if there had been a corruptive attack. And then in Germany again, Sportradar Group is a private institution which earns the money by doing with artificial intelligence. They measure the bets, the activity in betting on soccer games, for example, and if there are certain obviously strange developments in the betting system, they analyze it second by second. There's an automatic warning to the betting firms, and they sometimes even stop the betting system. Yeah? And finally, I want to attract your attention to an initiative by the German party Bündnis 90 Die Grünen, the Greens. And they have an interesting idea. They have an idea to establish a world anti-corruption agency. I think an interesting idea. I'm not a Green, but it's an interesting idea. We have a world anti-doping agency, which is doing a good job, which is important against the fight of doping. So let's think about it. Couldn't we have a world anti-corruption agency? And by the way, wouldn't it be a good opportunity for India? I mean, countries like yours complain, and I think it's correct, that they do not have a decent number of international sports federations in their home countries because they are all in Geneva or in Lausanne or in some other European countries. And indeed, it's a bit unfair, the distribution of international sports federations. India deserves international sports federation, but it will be very difficult to move the rowing federation from Lausanne to India. But with a new federation, you could have a chance. Of course, it will cost you a little bit of finance, but it's not too much. So talk with the international federations. Maybe they are not interested, I cannot say, but talk with them. Show them that you want to contribute to the fight against corruption in international sports. And I think India would be a very good place for a World Anti-Doping Agency. Okay, so I come to my conclusions. First of all, in my opinion, and it's personal opinion, we still today have too much corruption in international sports. Second, compared to other areas, business and politics, corruption in sport might be much smaller. We don't really know, but there are some statistics by demanding the people which show that yes, the people has a perception that in sports there's less corruption than in politics or in business. Yeah? The optimal amount of corruption in sport, which we should struggle for, and I have a hard time as an economist to say it, but the optimal degree of corruption should be 0. We should continue with the fight against corruption. Up to now, and this is a critique as an economist, the fight against corruption had been a fight of people from law and from pedagogy. Economists have not been involved that much. And we wonder, because go back to the formula. What is corruption about? It's about money. In almost all cases, it's about money. And money is a specialty of economists. It's not the specialty of people from law, not the specialty of people from pedagogy. It's the realm of economists. So Yes, I think economists should be much more included in the fight against corruption. And what are the most efficient additional economic measures? First of all, I think job rotation is important. Yes, the federations are on their way. The IOC is leading in that respect. My rowing federation also has a limited term of offices. I think it's a good idea. We should think about deferred payments. Up to now, I do not know any example in the sport federations of deferred payments, but it's a very efficient way of fighting corruption, as this can be seen by many states who pay their officials. Think about the World Anti-Doping Corruption Agency in India. I said again, think about it. Think about going into the discussion. I'm not sure that they will like it, but show that you are interested and discuss it, and they will see that you might be a good place, maybe not only for the Olympics, but also for international institutions. Then private solutions. Up to now, we hardly thought about private solutions. As a market economist, I think we should think much more about private solutions in the fight against corruption. And the last thing is, I didn't mention it too much in the discussion up to now, the Big Bang style in Singapore. So Singapore was a country which was suffering under hefty corruption. And once upon a time, they said, okay, we cannot fight corruption. And if you have seen in the Transparency Corruption Index, Singapore is now one of the best countries in fighting corruption. It's one of the cleanest countries in the world concerning corruption. So what did they do? They analyzed that corruption is a way of behavior. It's in the minds of the people. And it's difficult to change the minds. It's difficult to change the mind of a certain individual official if he thinks that all the others are corrupt. So they thought about a big bang. They published a law that I think it was 4-year time, on the 1st of January of, I forgot the year, everything will change. Only in 4 years' time, Olympic period. And they changed the payment of the state officials. They increased salaries extremely, so that state officials had been well paid. They risk to lose their jobs, and they risk to lose their pension. And then they said, but if there's any corruption, state official, you will immediately lose your job, which up to then was not the rule. And you will lose your pension. Yeah? So Big Bang, radical change in corruption activities and anti-corruption activities in 4 years' time. Announce it and make clear it will happen to anyone in that country. So, last word. I think India is a perfect place to think about further anti-corruption strategies. I think that the international sports federations and the international Olympic family will be happy if you could come about with additional ideas in fighting corruption. Go ahead, and I cross the fingers for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Wolfgang, for this exceptional and thought-provoking session. The floor is now open for your questions.
Yeah, I prefer to stand because I had a long flight and I had to sit so much, so I prefer to stand.
Fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity. First of all,
Please speak slowly because I had been blonde, and blonde means slow and not that quickly understanding. Please slowly.
thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity. Myself, Kumari Mesh, a WBC Muay Thai athlete. So I have 3 questions, sir. First one is, why boxing has the highest number of corruption cases across all sports events? And second one is, if there is so much high number of haters who hate corruption, then how corruption is happening simultaneously? And third one, how can India significantly contribute in a fight against corruption, because India itself is suffering from high corruption?
Yeah, so concerning the first question, It's maybe an easy answer, because if you look to the corruptive sports, I always say there are media sports, there are money sports. You have very few corruption in amateur sports because you don't earn the money there, and if you don't earn the money there, you can't finance the bribes. So boxing is worldwide a sport with a lot of money and a lot of media attention. Yeah? And secondly, up to recently, up to some years ago, the decision of the referees, of the umpires, was a bit not connected to accountability, not connected to transparency. So these were the two reasons why boxing was a victim of corruptive attacks. For example, the umpires in the 100-meter sprint, they don't really have a say. You know, there are umpires in the 100-meter sprint, but there's one who is shooting the gun or is giving the impulse for the start, and then there's a camera watching who is winning the 100-meter race. So the umpire doesn't really have a say. Yeah? Transparency is there, and the umpire doesn't have any chance to be corruptive, or very few chances to be corruptive. But in sport, in boxing, it had been different. Second, was the question, why is it different from sport to sport? Why is it different from people to people?
It was about economy. If there is so much high number of haters who hate corruption, then how corruption is happening simultaneously?
How is corruption happening simultaneously? Well, this is one of the really unique characteristics of corruption. It's one of the few crimes where you need two people to cooperate. Yeah? In all other crimes, if I decide to make a robbery, it's my decision, and the victim doesn't have any say. In this case, you need at least two people to cooperate. So at least there are simultaneously at least two persons, and the victim is a third person. So why is it simultaneously? Again, there's a theory that if everybody thinks that the others are corrupt, then of course you are inclined to also behave corruptly. Yeah? I showed you the one table about the perception of corruption in Europe, and you have seen that in some countries, 98% of the people think that corruption in their country is widespread. So how do you behave in such an environment? If you believe that everyone else is corrupt, you might be inclined to be corrupt as well. So in certain sports, where the idea is that everyone is taking doping medicaments, like in cycling some 10 years ago, what can you do? Of course, you're inclined to also go for the doping strategy. And the same is for corruption. If you think that in your sport, in your nation, everyone is corrupt, you will have simultaneous corruption by many people at the same time. And this third question, I forgot again.
Yes, sir. How can India significantly contribute in a fight against corruption?
Again, India can contribute. You have seen your position is not like Denmark's position. Yeah?
Yes.
So there's room to get better, not only in sport, but for the general. So if you promise to the international Olympic family that your Olympic bid would be the showcase, the first time in Olympic history. Again, it would be the first time in Olympic history where a nation stands up and says, connected to our Olympic bid, we contribute, first of all, to fighting corruption in the international sports by, for example, establishing a World Anti-Corruption Agency, but also by other measurements. And I told you some. We will be the first bid committee who is implementing deferred payment. We are the first bid committee who is having job rotation. We are the first bid committee who is having limited office times. Yeah? We will be the first bid committee, the first organization to do this and this and this. That will be, of course, interesting for the Olympic family. The Olympic family will listen to it, will think, oh, the Indians, they have a good idea. And then if you add, we will take the Olympic bid and the Olympic organization as a showcase, and we will change the rules in our nation, not only in sports, but also in politics and business. The international family will be outraged. They will really like it very much that you go ahead using the Olympic Games to make things better in your country. So there's a lot of space to contribute to the fight against corruption.
Thank you very much, sir. Your talk is very enlightening. It's a fine combination of athletic excellence and credibility in sports. Luckily, I also got the chance to be part of 3 Olympics. In Olympic Games, as an athlete, as member of the delegation, as an observer and manager, Indian hockey team. I played against your team when T. Cruz was leading your hockey team in 1972 Munich Olympics. Sir, Olympic movement believes in fair play. And doping is taking sports from fame to shame. And unfortunately, India is topping in doping. So, how to cope with the doping? How to cope with the dope in Indian sports to make India's image clean, and we may get the right of organizing Olympic sport 2036 successfully. How you can guide us here?
Yeah. So thank you for your question. All the respect to your athletic performance. I'm happy to meet you. And I'm also happy for your engagement against doping. It's a bit aside of my subject here, which is corruption. But nevertheless, I'm also fighting against doping wherever I can. It's correct. I will give some of my ideas in another presentation that I will have on Friday concerning doping. The point is, again, I know that India has a problem with doping, and I want to mention it's not only a problem of doping and sports, it will be a problem of Olympic Games. Imagine you have the Olympic Games here in Ahmedabad. Imagine they are beautifully organized. Everything is smooth. Imagine there had been no corruption. Everything is fine. And imagine you even have Indian athletes winning medals. But then imagine that there are doping controls, and maybe your athlete hero who won the gold medal in, I don't know, archery or in hockey, one day after the event is caught and is tested positively by doping. It's bad for the team, for the hockey team. It will be bad for the whole nation of India. It's bad for the international sporting family. It's bad for everyone, you know. We cannot really accept it. Such a scandal would really hurt all the Olympic Games in India. So in your own interest, if you want to be successful organizers of the Olympic Games, you must make sure that there is no doping of your athletes in the Olympic Games. And in order to make it sure, you have to start right now. Yeah? So your fight against doping is correct, and it needs every support from your government. Yeah? So the government, and my colleague from Poland said it, the government can make every pressure it wants by ruling that the money to the federations only comes if they obey to the rules. For example, to the rules of doping, anti-doping, and the rules of corruption. It's easy. If they don't obey, they don't get any money. And the last word. Normally, the athletes are under attack. So Ben Johnson might be the most famous doper in the world. Yeah? So it's always Ben Johnson. But in the truth, Ben Johnson, don't let me be misunderstood, was a victim himself, because he was raised, he was a talented athlete. He was 10, 12, 13, and he came into a milieu of doctors and coaches who told him, you're a good athlete, but I do have something which makes you an Olympic champion. And he believed in it. So he got hormones and he took it, you know. He was the victim of his surroundings. So please, if you fight against doping, don't have only the athletes in mind, but have in mind the officials from your federation, the official of your NOC, and the officials also in General Criminal Agency. Yeah? It's the surrounding of the athlete which is important. So if I say the athlete is a victim, it might be a bit exaggerated, because I know there have been also cases where the athlete did it on its own behalf and even didn't inform his coach and his managers. But in most of the cases which are published, it's at least not the guilt of the athlete alone. He needed the support of his team, of his managers, and of his federation. So have it in mind, and also make sure that the federations have every incentive to fight doping.
All right, to align with the session and to align with the time as well. We have the shark in the room, by the way, for the anti-doping as well, and he's waiting for his chance. Professor Yanis is with us, and he'll be taking session on anti-doping in the second half. We will take a last question. Sir, Professor Wolfgang is here for till 30th also. He has a session on 30th. So we have his time. Don't worry about it. We'll take the last question and then we'll conclude.
Hi, Professor. I'm Avinash. Just one question, but two aspects to it. I'm very curious to know if the international bodies like IOC are working to safeguard the whistleblowers towards this, who whistleblow towards the corruption scandals. Secondly, who takes the accountability to safeguard them if it is the host nation and somebody is, whistleblowing from the host nation? Is it the country who safeguards them for throughout their life, or is it the IOC who is the body which takes care of it? Thank you.
So first of all, concerning the IOC, I think the IOC has every incentive to fight corruption, because, and I didn't mention it, when there had been the Lake City scandal, what happened? They lost sponsors. They have top sponsors, 10 of them in general. 2 of them withdrew. They said, "You're corrupt. I don't support you." That costs them millions. And it's easy, as lots of empiricals work on it. If there are corrupt activities, the spectators don't like it. They withdraw from the sport. For example, we had a huge scandal, corruption scandal in professional in soccer. Twice in 73 and in 2006, and you could see the number of spectators, which was like that, was dropping. So it costs money, and the IOC is living from credibility. If they lose their credibility, they will lose also their financial power. So they need credibility. They will fight against corruption. I'm very sure about it. Yeah, they have every incentive to do so. I don't doubt that they are against corruption. Concerning the Indians, again, I think you have every incentive. If you organize the Olympic Games again and again, you can do whatever you want. If there are corrupted attacks, like in the case of Rio and in the case of Japan, it will not help you. The heritage from the Olympic Games in India will be hampered, will be destroyed. No? Else in the case of doping or in corruption. So you have every incentive to make sure that your Olympic Games will not be damaged by corruption and doping.
Thank you. May I now request our Registrar Rashtra Raksha University, Dr. Dharmesh Kumar Prajapati, to kindly come to the stage to felicitate Professor Wolfgang.